Thanks very much to my panelists for being here today. Since this is TV, I just want to point out that today's panel really is a spin-off of last year's panel that we did at this exact same time on broadband deployment. We had one or two questions on pole attachment, and this year we're spinning it off into its very own panel. In fact, we even have one of the stars of last year's panel in Van Blois.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Hi.
Here's hoping that today's panel is more Frasier than Joni and Chachi. Anyway, thank you all for being here and for sticking around and being part of today's INCOMPAS Policy Summit. You've heard a lot about pole attachments over the day, and you're going to hear a little bit more because I think this really is an important issue, I think, for a number of our members. And frankly, there's been a lot that has happened even just in the last 3 months. Honestly, at the end of last year's panel, I could have said, join us next year, same bat time, same bat channel. But, the truth is that we actually have seen some modest changes to the Commission's pole attachment rules. We wanted to walk you through some of those today, but we wanted to do it by telling the stories that our members have from, their own opportunities and interests in terms of their own broadband deployment. And so I'm thrilled to be joined by a number of world-class builders here today. And if I could have each of you we'll start with you, Francisco, just go down the row, tell us a little bit about yourself, tell us about your company, and then tell us about the interests that you have in pole attachments and in aerial deployment.
Yeah, so Francisco, I am CEO of Dobson Fiber. We're a regional fiber broadband provider headquartered in Oklahoma City. And we're in the process of building about 500,000 passings over the next 5 years, leveraging our 5,000 mile middle mile network. We are owned by a private equity infrastructure fund. So we have about $600 million of capital that we're deploying in the state of Oklahoma to bring broadband to underserved communities. Obviously, the cost per passing is a metric that we're all very familiar with and we all watch very carefully. And obviously, getting access to the pole infrastructure in these markets is key to our ability to deploy broadband as quickly as we can and as cost effectively as we can. So, we have some great partnerships with our local utility providers, and I think we work fairly well together. But, as someone once told me, good fences make for good neighbors. So if we have a set of rules that we can all live by, I think it's good for the utilities and it's good for us. So.
Yeah, Van with Crown Castle. Crown is a nationwide provider of shared infrastructure. So you heard from my colleague earlier today, but we own about 40,000 wireless towers, 90,000 route miles of fiber, and 115,000 small cells on air or under contract. So we offer a variety of telecommunications services. We lease our towers to communications providers, public safety entities, et cetera. So our small cell and fiber business, having access to pole infrastructure is crucial. And like the other fiber providers here, we're familiar with wireline attachments, but one thing that Crown does a little bit differently is we also offer that small cell infrastructure, and using existing utility poles to attach antennas and fiber is the most efficient way to deploy. These poles have been used for a variety of things over, sort of 100 years. You think about the telegraph and telephone, long distance, and now, moving into the fiber world and wireless infrastructure world, they continue to serve an essential function and an input for our business. So it's crucial that we have access to that infrastructure at reasonable rates, terms, and conditions.
Daniel Friesen, I'm the Chief Innovation Officer and co-founder of IdeaTech. We're a Kansas-based fiber internet provider, and we've been in the space a long time. We've attached to many poles and have found, when the process does work, it works well, and it's a very cost-efficient way to deploy fiber. And so, our interest in pole attachment policy is related to cost of deployment and leveraging, an existing infrastructure to deploy it at better costs. And we see that so important in the rural space of our state where every dollar that we can save allows us to go further into a market, further to these rural underserved homes. So it's incredibly important to our mission to serve the underserved in the state.
Thanks, Daniel. If you were here earlier today and you heard Commissioner Carr speak to Angie, then you heard about the bruising battle that last year was in terms of action on the Commission's notice of proposed rulemaking. Van, last year you walked us through what the Commission was considering. I was wondering if you could now take us through what the Commission adopted in December with its report and order, its declaratory ruling, and with its further notice.
Yeah, absolutely. It was probably the most monumental poll attachment policy shift that we've seen since the 2018 order. So these things don't come along very often, so we like to celebrate our wins. And it was really 4 years in the making. I mean, the proceeding was initiated in 2020 to look at costs of pole replacement and how they could be better allocated between attachers and the pole owner. So we got this order in December 2023. I brought a little bit of a cheat sheet because there's so many elements to the order. So you mentioned it's report and order, a declaratory ruling, and a further notice of proposed rulemaking. So we'll just sort of go through those in order. In the report and order, the FCC adopted a new accelerated process for determining pole attachment disputes called the RBAT, the Rapid Broadband Assessment Team. It's an intra-agency task force that's charged with looking at and evaluating disputes between owners and attachers if the matter is impeding or delaying broadband deployment. So think of that as something that's not purely a rate dispute where your fiber is already up on the pole, it's preventing you from reaching those customers. So that was a crucial modification to the dispute rules. The second thing in the report and order was requiring utilities to disclose cyclical or periodic inspection reports upon the request of a new attacher. So with your pole attachment application, you submit a request, and within 10 business days, you would get the cyclical or periodic inspection report that's most recent for the set of poles that you're asking to apply to. And it also contains a rule that utilities have to retain these reports until the next intervening report comes out. So that was the report and order. The declaratory ruling, it modified the Commission's understanding of what it means to have a red tagged pole. This is crucial for, we're seeing, and the way this proceeding was going, we really wanted to find a better cost allocation for when an attacher is required to pay to replace a pole, because in our view, what we're seeing is we're paying for almost 100% of the cost of those replacement poles, and the utility ultimately owns the pole. And so the two sort of clarifications in the declaratory ruling that got at the pole replacement cost allocation, one is saying that a red tag pole, in the FCC's view, means any pole that the utility identifies for replacement for any reason other than lack of capacity for a new attachment. So it left the decision to red tag a pole up to the utility, but the FCC also said that the utility can't just evade cost causation by failing to red tag a pole that's either out of compliance or has a safety violation. So that we think will be crucial in ensuring that attachers are not paying for 100% of the cost of every pole, especially if it's deteriorated or has already been identified for replacement. The other clarification in the declaratory ruling was clarifying when a pole is not necessitated solely by the new attacher. And the FCC came out with a list of 4 or 5 things. I'm not going to go through each of them because we'd probably be here till tomorrow. But there was a few things that the FCC said, okay, this is when a pole is not necessitated solely by the attachment of the new attacher. There was a bit on requiring utilities to provide copies of easement information prior to saying a new attacher can't share in the easement or has to get their own easement if there's an easement underlying the pole. It also clarified that when you submit a large order that has over 3,000 poles, or about 5% of the utilities poles within a given state, those first 3,000 would be subject to the existing make-ready timeframe. The final bit of this order was the further notice of proposed rulemaking. So there were a few items that the Commission is still seeking comment on for additional changes to its rules. The first concerns large orders, so those orders that are over 3,000 poles or 5% of a poles in a state. The Commission is proposing to allow an extra 90 days for the timeline under which the pole owner has to approve or deny those applications. And the Commission's also asking about, should we prohibit a utility from imposing a limit on an application size? Are folks taking advantage of the self-help provisions? Are there issues with contractor availability when you're employing self-help? Should a utility have to notify the attacher if they know that within the first 2 weeks that they're not going to be able to complete the make-ready work or the survey work? And should the Commission make it easier for a new attacher to get contractors approved? So a number of really important clarifications, new rules, and also the FCC asking questions about some of those further notice items.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Van. Francisco and Daniel, I want to get your reactions, I think, to that. I think, will this help you, further enable you to gain access to polls? And were there areas where the Commission left some things on the table that you'd like to see, the Commission take action on in the future?
Really, what's really important to us is the 3,000 poll rule, right? So just to give you some perspective, we currently have about 100,000 polls that we submitted applications for. So we've well bypassed the 3,000 polls. And so what happens is you're now having to go in and negotiate what that timeline looks like. And what you're dealing with these utilities is that they're very much understaffed. You might be looking at one individual that's handling joint use, right? So you're now in a situation where they just don't have the staff to process these applications. The second piece is, once you start processing the applications, right, it usually gets outsourced to an engineering group in which you have no control over. It's kind of a blank check, right? It's go do the survey and then you get an invoice and you pay what you pay. And then the timeline, obviously, is also an issue there. And same thing on the construction side. So I think adding the timeline requirements, right, allows the utilities to effectively staff up in order to process these applications. The cost gets passed on to us anyway for processing fees and so forth and so on. So we're paying for it anyway. We have actually done a version of the self-help with our utilities in our footprint, a hybrid version. In that we actually start to interact directly with the engineering firm to perform the surveys, and I think there's a sort of a middle ground here, because if you think about what is the utility interested in, right? They're interested in safety. I mean, that's up and foremost. That's what you always hear, right? So you got to make sure you're up to your NEC codes, pole loading, right? All those things. So if we can invoke a self-help in which you have contractors from the survey side or engineering firms that are approved by the utility that are using their tools, you manage the project with the engineering firm, and then they in turn provide the data to the utility, right? And we're fully transparent. We get to control the timeline, we get to control the resources, we get to control the money, right? Versus just being an open checkbook. And same thing on the construction side, right? And that gets to be a little more tricky, because what happens there is you have hurricanes or ice storms, which then there's a shortage of poles and conductors and things like that. So you may have some force majeure events, and then there's just a lack of labor. So I think those two things, if we can get the volume of the poles, with the timeline, and if they can't meet the timeline, then we can then self-help. But we don't want to be heavy-handed. We want firms that are approved by them, 3 firms, 4 firms, and then we can negotiate, but be transparent with them. I think everyone wins, because what they want is to get us out of their hair as quickly as possible. So this sort of accomplishes that goal for all of us. So,
Definitely, I mean, we want to be appreciative to the FCC and all their work on this issue. It's come a long way, and I appreciate, Encompass's role in helping the industry get to where we are today. But, you know me, Chris, some people know me here, and I always have a few complaints about everything, and this is
Suggestions.
yeah,
Suggestions.
This for us especially. I mean, we're a small to medium-sized operator. It's a David and Goliath situation. You have a small operator trying to deal with a billion-dollar utility, and it's an extremely challenging issue. I mean, Crown is not a small company by any means, but you have similar issues, and so while again appreciate all of the work, I think the ability, we'll see what the BAT, what was it?
RBAT, yeah.
The BAT program, how that works and if that's effective. We've seen previous processes to be very ineffective for us, whether it's informal or, we just don't have the time, frankly, or the resources to issue formal complaints. And so, we were talking in the hallway that this part of our industry is going to explode. We have all of this money coming into the industry, and we need efficient ways to deploy it. And this has to be part of the process. And if we don't get it right and further reform this process quickly, we're going to really collide with all of this money. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done yet. I think, Francisco mentioned the blank check issue. Kind of missing from the latest order, which I thought the FCC would connect with, and we tried to put it in the comments we worked with at Encompass, is this economic incentive process where you incentivize through, and we're getting there, right? Like we moved from a cost causer argument, now we have this grandfathering argument, but this idea, where we need to incentivize through sharing of costs, utilities to make the right decisions. And there's these arguments of safety and reliability. We understand that. We want that for our communities. We want that for our own attachments. But it's amazing if you look at the full spectrum of pole owners. You have investor-owned utilities over here that can be very hard to work with, that without certain, economic incentives work against you, because if they don't have to pay anything, they're going to charge you as much as possible to keep you off the pole. If you go on the other side, you have municipalities that are very invested in their community and often are some of the easiest to work with. And somehow, they're not any less interested in safety and reliability, but somehow you can attach quickly. You don't have the massive, complex engineering processes that you have with this side. And so, if the FCC would work on making sure that whether it's, engineering costs that benefit the utility or pole replacement costs, if they're sharing in those costs, I think that will be the natural economic incentive that will bring the utility's own processes into more of a realistic safety and reliability scope. And so, moving that in the middle through economic means is a suggestion that we think was kind of missed. And the grandfathering process, we've think, the utilities have moved their argument from, you're the cost causer, you have to pay everything, to, oh, it's grandfathered, you have to pay for everything. And so it's a bit of a loophole there, where now we're having this grandfathering argument like every pole was in kind of a reliable state at the time it was built, and it was never touched over 30 years, and therefore it's grandfathered. It's a very unfair argument that's really hard to articulate. It's really hard to argue with the pole owner. So we believe the grandfathering issue needs some more work as well.
Van, I want to turn it back to you and give you an opportunity. Crown Castle has put forward a cost allocation methodology for pole replacement. Before we get into some of the newest developments, what would Crown like to see the commission consider, when it takes a look at this further notice on large pole orders and on self-help? Are there areas from the original NPRM that are still open that you'd like to see the commission address?
Yeah, we did an economic study with the Brattle Group, and we submitted that with our comments 2 years ago when the comment cycle was open, trying to emulate what a non-monopolistic market would look like. Because you think there's really only one network of poles, and we all need to attach to them. But the owners of those poles are essentially a monopoly. There's not a redundant pole network, and so we end up having these rules and restrictions that control some of the monopolistic behaviors of the pole owners. But our study was sort of simulating a competitive market. If there were a competitive market, what would that look like, and how much would each party be paying in a competitive market? The FCC didn't take that up. I know cable was pushing that as well. I think we got a lot with the red tag definition and with the clarification on when a pole replacement is not necessitated solely by the new attacher. And so we're focusing in the further notice on the contractor issues. Getting contractors approved is sometimes an issue for Crown. The utility may have a list. It's only 2 contractors. They're using both contractors. Those contractors do a lot of work for the utilities. They do a little work for us. And so they don't really have any motivation to work with us, especially given that if we're employing self-help, the utility has already missed their deadline, and we're sort of, we're in this space where we are going out without approval. I mean, the rules allow it, but the contractors are sometimes more reticent to do that. So I think the issues that the FCC is looking at in terms of larger order timelines, additional contractor availability, we think that they should be able to qualify a contractor within a set period of time so that they're not just sitting in limbo. I think some of those issues the FCC is looking at are really important. In terms of the cost allocation, I think we're going to see what we can do with the rules that the FCC adopted. Of course, I think we'll probably get into this, but we're defending the FCC's order. There have been 2 separate petitions for recon from 2 different utility groups attacking the commission's reasoning, and an ex parte that my name is on, so my name is in a lot of the recon petitions. So I think, in terms of defending the FCC's order, opposing the petitions for recon, and then looking at those issues that the FCC has teed up in the further notice are what we're going to focus on this year.
Yeah, I was going to say that today's panel has the title "Holding the Line: Navigating Changes to Federal Pole Attachment Rules," and holding the line is not just meant to, the pole holds the line on the way. It really is. How do we protect some of these modest gains, that were achieved, in the commission's December report and order? Van, to your point, we have two petitions for reconsideration. One from the Edison Electric Institute, which aims to roll back several findings from the declaratory ruling. The first, which is that a pole replacement is not necessitated solely by an attachment request if a utility changes its internal construction codes. Daniel, you were talking about the grandfathered poles issue that you and IdeaTech have faced in Kansas. The second is obviously on the easement issue, which is the ex parte letter, Van, with your name on it. The other is from the Coalition of Concerned Utilities, and they're really asking for the commission to reconsider the part of the report and order that tried to improve transparency by requiring utilities to provide attachers with a copy of the utility's most recent pole inspection report, and so I would put it to the group. I mean, where are all of you on these? I mean, obviously, Encompass is going to oppose each of these petitions. You know, I think all of you are on the same page. Why is it important for the commission to reject some of these petitions for reconsideration and hold the line on on where it went with some of its modest changes to the poll attachment rules?
I mean, it was interesting in December. You know, the FCC adopted this process where they release drafts of their orders before they vote on them, which is a relatively new phenomenon. And so this draft came out like Thanksgiving Day, I want to say. And so you have a short period of time in which you can go in and talk to the FCC about the draft. And then when it was adopted in December, you know, it was voted out by the full commission. It was interesting, at the full commission meeting, the commissioners were all saying, like, we never thought that poll attachments would be such a contentious issue. So, you know, the bit about the cyclical inspection reports being disclosed, the utilities were going in, EEI included, and in their ex partes between Thanksgiving and Christmas, were saying, actually, the commission should adopt this. This is great. We're really happy with this. Like in Washington, you know that you've gotten sort of a middle result, or sort of the center of the road result, if no one's happy with the order. But in this case, cable and telecom attachers were going in and asking the FCC to do more, and the utilities were like, this is great, like you guys should just, you know, vote this out as it is. So we think that there were some improvements from the draft that was released in November to what was ultimately adopted in December, as a result of, you know, an industry push to improve the FCC's order. But the disclosure requirements were so limited in terms of the transparency that they're requiring of utilities. It's just strange to see complaints about them now, because the FCC was, and we asked for, cable companies asked for, improved transparency. You know, give us any information that you have about the poll that we're applying for. If you already keep it in your normal course of business, then just disclose it to us. And so the FCC ultimately adopted something that was a little bit more conservative. And they said, if they keep a cyclical inspection report, they'll have to disclose that. We think it's a modest improvement over the status quo, and we'd like to see that protected. I think the utilities are saying, well, the information in the report's not going to be useful to you anyway. It's going to be out of date, and it will increase the amount of disputes because you're going to be second guessing us, and probably in some cases we will be. Through that,
we're being played off.
So anyway, it's something that we want to defend. I think we'll sort of see if those reports are of the limited utility that they're claiming, but we're going to defend what the FCC adopted.
And Francisco, Daniel, I've got one more question, but I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to come to the defense of any opposition to some of those petitions for reconsideration.
I tell you, I understand the reporting and so forth and so on. I mean, for us, time to market matters. So if you were to ask me what's the most important thing for us, is the volume of polls, the timelines. I mean, if we have to go in there and hire an engineering firm to do all the make-ready analysis, and we can impose self-help, so we control the timeline, and we're not subject to number of polls per application, and how to manage that flow with the utility, because they may not work in the order in our priorities. To me, that's the most important thing to us at this point, because we just, we're under, we have to get 100,000 passings done a year. And so there's not we can't have paralysis by analysis, right? We have to move. So,
well, I real quickly, I would agree with the point of we don't need to go backwards. The point of getting data, that was the very limited, the smallest amount of data we could get. We really need more data, and the idea that a utility can't go file, export, and give us, the metadata of polls. That was a little disappointing that we couldn't get that. And so, we don't need to go backwards from the very bare minimum. And so, beyond that, the overarching policy effort of the FCC is to bridge the digital divide, and this is a very important part of that process. And even more, we have a significant amount of taxpayer money that has to be deployed efficiently, and this is one way to do it. And so those policy issues together should be enough to reject any arguments that this has gone too far. It should be going further.
I'm glad you brought that up, Daniel, actually, because with all this federal funding coming, the commission really is only half the story. The other half of the story is the states. States are allowed, if they're reverse preemption states, to come up with their own regulatory framework for polls. Where are the states on this, and what kind of work needs to be done with the states to ensure that their poll attachment rules are either better or at least match the commission's poll attachment rules?
Yeah, we found that the states usually, the reverse preemption states, so there's 22 states in the District of Columbia that don't follow the FCC's rules on polls and can reverse preempt the FCC and come up with their own rules, typically from the Public Utility Commission or Public Service Commission. And many have done so, and many are currently looking at their rules to make sure that, either by the encouragement of their governor or the broadband office, making sure that they're ready to roll out that broadband investment that the states are going to be receiving from NTIA and other sources. There are still a disappointing number of states that reverse preempted in '96 and then never did anything afterwards. And so they may not have specific rules, they may not have clear deadlines. And when we're operating in that environment, we can't, we don't have the negotiating leverage with a monopoly poll owner to be able to say, we really think that your terms and conditions are unreasonable, because we don't have those really good rules of the road. So there are a number of states that are looking at this right now. We filed comments in New York yesterday. Maine, Kentucky are states that are sort of ahead of the curve, looking at these issues, asking questions of their providers, national and local providers. But there's a number of states that are really just they're not looking at this issue. And ultimately that means that they may be left behind for investment, or the investment ends up, stranded and going to pay for pole replacements rather than broadband.
Francisco, Dan.
Van said it very well.
Well, and we're also just a few minutes over, so please join me in thanking our panelists.